So if you didn't guess, we are recording this, as Alexa just said on our behalf, and it is on Zoom. So just want to let you all know that. We're going to start with the public hearing, which has to do with the parking ordinance relative to Everett Park, William Street, Pressey Court, Sawyer Lane, having to do with New London Barn Playhouse. And I believe we have at least two representatives from the barn. And I'm not sure who wants to speak, if both of you, or how you would like to do this, Keith.
I'll begin.
It'd be great if you'd open it up. Yes.
That's great. For those that don't know, my name is Keith Coughlin,
And Keith, excuse me, but Will does have a microphone.
Wonderful.
So there you go.
Thank you.
Not that you haven't ever seen one before.
I appreciate that. I would project, but I appreciate having this. So my name is Keith Coughlin. I am the Executive Artistic Director of the New London Barn Playhouse. Here to my left is John Fink, President, and Board Member Janet Miller-Haynes, as well as Board Member Peggy Throw. And we are glad to be able to continue conversation as we approach the upcoming summer that we're obviously very excited about, being the Barn Playhouse's 90th summer season, and all obviously opening up many new exciting facilities after our successful Play Apart campaign. I know that we have been able to meet together as a group in past summers to try to create a plan that is in agreement for neighbors and neighborhood and selectmen and Chief of Police and Jay as Fire Chief. And so we welcome this conversation. In approach to this public hearing, we have created a document, and I have a number of copies, and I do see that many of you have a copy in front of you as I sent it. If anyone would like to see as sort of jumping off point of what the Barn Playhouse would like to potentially open a discussion with. And I will say, I know a lot of this is related to street parking, but I also want to acknowledge that we have talked to the 4 businesses in the neighborhood to ask them if they would be willing to partner together to offer parking for performances in the evening. And I'm very glad to say that all 4 of those businesses have been gracious enough to allow evening parking for evening performances. And then obviously to acknowledge that our new parking lot will be paved, striped, lights, and a definitive traffic pattern that has not existed in the past. And also increasing the amount of spots that we're able to fit into that back parking lot. And we think that that's going to create a major difference, at least in the majority of parking that we're able to need in our evening performances. I don't know if that's suffices to kick us off, or if you'd like me to discuss anything more in the map that I have shared.
The only question I have is, I know that there are plans underfoot to have production or use of the Playhouse during the winter.
And the answer to that is that we won't be using the Playhouse during the winter. It will be the Fleming Center of Artistic Development, which we have talked about what the code allows in terms of amount of people that might be there, but what is realistic to an event that we might hold there. And that is about 120 people. That is what we would house in a performance or a class or a lecture. And that is more than half of what we serve in the Playhouse, which is seats 290 in the summer. So I truly believe, and in conversations with civil engineer that has helped design that parking lot, that any programming that we would hold in the Fleming Center for Artistic Development would be able to house vehicles within our physical parking lot. So when we get into fall, winter, spring, I am confident with that maximum number of people that we would use in that new building, that we would be able to house that on our own. So we're really talking about effects in the neighborhood only in the summer, when we're obviously welcoming more participants to the barn.
Although it appears that you are stating that the redone parking lot will have 54 spaces for potentially 120 individuals. I mean, granted, they will come in more than one. in a vehicle, but
and what
with snow removal and so forth.
and so we do have we're grateful to know that we have that property that's on the corner of Williams and Everett that we can remove snow into to make it a maximum use of all of those spaces. And the equation that was used was 0.3 spaces per person arriving, right, for a theater performance type of thing. And that is what allows me to think that these 54 spaces would accommodate that type of capacity.
Okay, and then my last question, when we talked about this earlier, we had talked about the potential for using volunteers to assist people parking in a timely manner out back and making the effective use of that space. Is that still something that's being considered, or?
I know that has been a discussion point in a forum similar to this in the past. I would ask the selectmen and community to allow us to use this wonderful new parking lot that we've invested in before we make a commitment. For sure, it was an unruly parking lot in the past with people parking not uniform in angles and spread apart. And so we were not maximizing our space. And also the traffic pattern was not clear as well, or lit in. And these are all expenses that we have done to try to improve this parking lot. And I truly believe that that space is going to be, it's going to work as a parking lot should, as what we have not seen in the past in a more uniform way.
Okay, I'll just make a comment that both Cape Cod Playhouse and Agunquit still uses volunteers, no matter how much things are identified in terms of the parking component and who's going what, but it does still rise to pandemonium sometimes. But in any case, Janet or Bill, do either of you have a question for Keith before we? Okay. So why don't we go to the chief? Which one? You can choose who would like to start, either Jay or Emily.
Sure, happy to. So thank you for providing the maps. Ironically, I think I can't remember how many times we visited. It started with our former DPW director, Richard Lee, along with our former police chief, Ed Anderson. So this has been something that we've been looking at for a while and contemplating. And so the chief, Bob and I all looked at this again, I think probably 3 or 4 times so far this year. And so we would concur with the barn with regards to William Street. William Street, one of the biggest things that we look at is accessibility and one's safety. So whenever we evaluate anything, safety is first and foremost when we're doing an evaluation. The other thing that we look at is how is the neighborhood affected? So if they're, for instance, as you pull on to Pressey Court, in the past, on the right-hand side, there was no parking on the right-hand side, even though that makes the most amount of sense because there's the most amount of real estate. The concern was that after the show, with Pressey Court and Sawyer Lane being dead-end streets, then you had vehicles turning around, and as the season progresses and there's less daylight, then we were, and I'm not sure if it came from the neighborhood or whatever the reason, but we're concerned about headlights in people's homes of all the cars turning around. So when we look at Pressey Court area, because of the dead end roads, no cul-de-sac or hammerheads on the end, and it being difficult, our recommendation was not to have any parking on that T area. The other thing is that we wanted to be consistent. So when we look at stuff, we look at consistency. And so if we're discouraging parking on William Street, it would make sense that the parking on Pressey Court would be limited. Going down Everett Park. One of the considerations that we look at is driveway access, topography, and once again, consistency. As people are driving down the road from William Street, once the parking lot's full, and obviously this just deals with the section of Everett Park from Williams to Parkside. It does not look at it, the section going towards Newport Road where people do park. So when making that right-hand corner, one of the things that we're concerned about is line of sight. Once again, looking at the safety. So line of sight, super important. Our recommendation was to, and I'm not sure if anyone knows, even numbers are on the right-hand side in town, odd numbers on the left. Not that it has any, all you do is add a 0 to your house number and that's how many feet down the road you are. Just a little bit of interest. So the odd side of the road, when you're going down Williams and you make that right onto Everett Park, our recommendation was for parking to take place on the odd side of the road or towards Main Street side, running parallel. And likewise, our recommendation, Chief, our DPW Director, Harrington, and myself, when we looked at it, once again, from a consistency standpoint, when you're making that swing, we were concerned about parking being on either sides of that hammerhead on the even side. So our recommendation was to have parking only on the odd side, which does differ from the Barnes recommendation to the select board. But once again, we took many factors from topography to driveway access, all those good things. Did I miss anything? Bob? The other thing too that we looked at is signage, and obviously making sure that it's important for people to know. So Bob was really good with looking at where we would place signs, whether it be no parking from here to corner or no parking at all on that side of the road. And so he really looked at it from in between lots. So it wasn't in someone's front yard. Those are the things from an aesthetic perspective that we also took in consideration when making our recommendation to our town administrator and select board.
Bob?
Hi, Bob Harrington. One of the things that I was talking about with Jay is what we've run into before is if we put a sign in front of somebody's house, we will get a phone call because they don't want to look at it. So looking at trees, places to kind of hide them, that side actually seemed like the better area to try to conceal them a little bit. There's a lot of open land on the other side, but it's also Jay's concerns and Emily's with the rest of the topography there as far as getting it to lay out.
And initially, as a lot of residents know that live in that area, there've been times that our fire trucks, or I should say, even our support vehicles, our utility truck went down the road and our mirrors were barely passable because of the amount of parking. So it's great to hear that the Barnes reached out to other businesses, especially for the later shows, and are coming up with a parking plan. And obviously we would recommend that general education to the patrons of the barn is most important. And you know, we'd probably also echo what our chair had said as far as having someone volunteer initially so that the start of the season, people get into the swing of things, and you might not need them for the entire season. But at least starting off on the right foot wouldn't be a bad idea.
Bill?
Jay, could you clarify? I think you said come down William Street and turn right. I think you meant turn left, don't you?
Both sides. So as you're coming from Newport Road down Everett Park, starting on Newport Road near Scythe Shop, And it doesn't show on this particular
Right.
map.
It would be
So it's
further
that section of the road that's off. That's on the odd, if you're driving down the road, even numbers are on your right, odd numbers on your left. Holman Lane's off there, Apple Tree Lane. So it'd be on the same side as Apple Tree Lane and then progressing up Everett Park. So on the, if you're looking at the streets parallel, it would be the odd numbers on Everett Park, but the side of the street closest to Main Street.
So I was confused, I guess, by the way you presented it, because it seems to me if I come out of the paved lot and come down William Street to Everett Park,
If you made that right, parking would be allowed. If you made that right onto Everett Park, parking would be allowed on that right-hand side of the road as you proceed down Everett Park.
but is that
Now, coming from Parkside Road,
excuse me, if I come down out of the parking lot and turn left,
yes,
if the parking is on the odd side, am I going to have to turn around to park, or am I going to park?
that is correct.
So
The concern,
Doesn't it
yeah.
make more sense to come down William Street, turn left and park on the right-hand side as the barn shows here? I mean, I'm confused about coming down William Street, turning left, and then be going the wrong way.
I totally concur, and there's not a perfect solution to this, and hence the reason why the Board of Selectmen get to make that ultimate decision. You know, if the parking lot is full, certainly as you come out, you could always go back onto Main Street, come down Parkside, make that right, and then park on the right-hand side. Otherwise, vehicles are going to have to turn around. No different than if vehicles, the problem is a line of sight standpoint. We didn't want to have a situation where parking was okay on one side of the road, but then wasn't okay on the other side of the road. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, if the board decides to go that way, that's fine, as recommended by the barn players. But from our standpoint, it was a consistency standpoint and line of sight.
You have a comment on Jay's? Can you identify yourself?
Yes, my name is Donna Sparks.
Yep.
May I go up and point on that map? Please? Thanks. I'm here to support my neighbor who has laryngitis, who's sitting in the back. And she lives here. And with the new expanded barn parking lot, which literally goes all the way now up to this point, they've cut down all the trees. She and her husband are going to feel like they're living between two parking lots, one here and one here, if cars are allowed on the side of the street that the fire chief is recommending. And so we are hoping actually that you all of the selectmen will consider the barn's proposal and have the parking on the opposite side of the street. Because now that the barn is going to be 365 days a year, the Coxes would be living literally between two parking lots all the time. Other than that, I support everything that you said because safety is the most important.
The other thing that we looked at was fire hydrants, and certainly the highlighted green section that the barn proposed is great, but there are also some driveways that green section goes across, and the last thing you want to do is have someone block your driveway. So we looked at it of number of spots, the topography dropping down. There have actually been vehicles that have pulled off the side of the road on that proposed side and have been stuck in people's lawns, especially during wetter seasons. So those are all factors that we took in consideration. And I know that no solution is perfect, especially in this situation. But it was just our recommendation to the board. And once again, ultimately, it's their decision.
John?
Thank you. My name is behind this mask, John Fink. I'm with the Barn Playhouse. And we wanted to thank the 4 businesses that have so graciously offered to share their parking lot at night for our performances. It really adds many, many more spots to our parking litany, especially Spring Ledge, which has capacity for up to 20 cars in their back area. One area we did look into was speaking with the superintendent about this parking facility here. And he said that was not an option at this point, but I wondered if you as selectmen and as chiefs could perhaps revisit that, because if we were able to have access to some of these spots here at night, not during the day or matinees, that would alleviate much of the need for on-street parking. And it's close enough so that people could walk safely along the street to get to the barn, especially with the new striping to protect the walkers crossing in front of the barn. So if you have any influence or suggestions for approaching the possibility of using some of these spots, it would address many of the concerns here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Cobb, do you want to speak?
I didn't have too much else to add, but from what Chief Lyon had already said. But I can say that whatever it is going to have to be just signed very, very well, not only so the folks visiting the barn will understand it, but so that the officers who are asked to enforce the parking will understand that as well. So I don't have too much else to add. Besides, I'm really encouraged by the fact that you have added already 35 parking spaces from the local businesses. So that adds a tremendous amount. That's half of your parking lot already. So that's a really great thing that the businesses were willing to work with you on that. Yeah, I don't have too much else.
Nancy.
I'm Nancy Putnam, and if you look at your map where it says Everett Park, that's my house. So I'm opposite the Coxes, and we are in the green line. I support what the barn is proposing, and I disagree respectfully with the chief because you need to be able, you've got to recognize, unless you stand there on barn, during the plays, people just pull in and they park willy-nilly. We do recognize it's going to have to be signed, and we do fully support what they're trying to do here. And I think that the other important thing to sign and be recognized is the intersection at Williams and Everett Park. So regardless of whatever you decide to do with our street, you've never enforced, in my time, and I've been there 14 years, I've never seen a ticket on a car. And people just pull into that intersection. There's a fire hydrant there. There's no line of sight when everybody's parked. And I really hope that whenever you come to the conclusion of, it gets enforced. And I also do think at least some of the time, I agree with the suggestion that there be a volunteer in the parking lot. People need to be trained. So thank you.
Steve.
Thanks, Bud. Steve Ensign, and I am off the top of the map, so on Sawyer Lane. My question has to do with, since the barn needs are seasonal, are we talking about seasonal restrictions in that a permanent sign might say no parking this side of the road from June 1st to September 15th? Or are we abandoning any opportunity to park off-season, such as the Coxes hosting Thanksgiving dinner, and their people then have, their friends are parking in front of Nancy's house? So are we talking about the intense summer season, which is, this is all involving, or is it going to be a year-round restriction, such as no parking on Pressey Court?
That's a concern that we talked about as well. I mean, for folks, for that very reason, having events at their own home, having a yard sale at their home, people who have lawn maintenance companies come and do their yard work. So those are all concerns that are very real. And I don't know if I have an answer to that, but that is something that we talked about, is that if it's no parking, it's no parking. I mean, we don't really want to go out and ticket cars that are there for a play at the Barn Playhouse. I certainly don't want to sour people coming to our community that came to watch a great performance and they get a parking ticket. But there does need to be a mechanism of enforcement so that people know that they can't continue to park that way.
Keith?
Thank you. Just to add, and this was mentioned in terms of helping and informing, wherever decisions are landed for the summer ahead, we will update a map so it includes correct instruction, and it is our intention to put that on social media, website, e-blast to all of our patrons, even in hopes of connecting with our ticket system so that when someone gets a confirmation 24 hours before their ticket, that it would also include instructions for a map or a click to a link to say, these are the proper places that you are able to park. So we will take from these decisions that are made to try to inform patrons of where the green lines are, where the green is and where the red is, with a way to try to communicate that. To just acknowledge, and this has come up in the past, we do our best to make sure that our staff who also have vehicles do not park on site in performance time. It can be a challenge because if we say don't park in the parking lot, then they're parking on Main Street as close as they can get. And it is one of the other reasons why we've had that discussion if this lot was available. But please know to all that we are trying to maximize the number of spaces for patrons that are visiting, and the staff component is a component of that we're looking to free up these spaces, street side, business, or in our lot specific. I will acquiesce to neighbors. I am not, we put this green line on Everett to reference an option. I am just asking that we do one side. I am not sold that it needs to be one or the other, so we'll leave that to discussion and parties that be, but just know that our stance is one-sided. Either is we concur with and support. And also an acknowledgement that there will be parking down Everett Park towards Newport that is not on this map. It wasn't my intention to block any driveways, but obviously we'll update maps to whatever that is to not represent that. The discussion on Pressey Court has been one that has come in the past. And really putting it on that side of the street, the recommendation is to try to maximize spaces with a full acknowledgement of what Chief Lyons has brought up, that turnaround happens at the end of the night. If it was agreed upon to do the other side, it will limit the amount of spaces just because of of where driveway and post op boxes and that is. But we would ask for there to be some consideration of one of those sides. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Your name?
Edward Ordman. I'm at 132 Everett Park, across the street from Donna Sparks. Observation: people looking for a parking space often come from Main Street down William Street and are looking for the first available space. If they turn right, it would be nice if they could park on the right. If they turn left, it would be nice if they park on the right. I understand that provides you with line of sight problems. On the other hand, if you were to enforce no parking within 15 feet or 25 feet of the corner, that might resolve that problem adequately. The times when I've observed cars having to be towed away in the past is when cars park on both sides of the street near that corner. As to the Pressey Court area, if the problem is people turning around at the end of the show, it might be best if parking were allowed in the direction pointing out of the court. So they have to do their turning around before the show instead of afterwards.
And we did look at that with Pressey Court. The issue is the real estate, as Keithan indicated, there's probably 3 to 4 parking spots as you are pulling out of Pressey Court, because you've got a line of sight from a Pressey Court on that initial elbow. And then you've got a driveway. So we take in consideration the swing of vehicles or getting fire apparatus or emergency apparatus in there. And then you also have a fairly wide driveway with mailboxes, a fire hydrant. So those are all considerations that we looked at. So it was certainly, we did not look at it from one side. It was multifaceted. And as I said, this discussion's been going on probably for 7 years or more. So it's great. And just to back up, the reason why vehicles probably haven't been ticketed or towed, not to speak on behalf of Chief Cobb, there's been no enforcement mechanism. So you can't just randomly go and ticket a car for parking on one side of the road with no signage saying that you can't park there.
So one more thing I want to throw out there. If indeed the barn's intent is to use the on-street parking only seasonal, if you will, for the summer, do the signs have to be permanent? I mean, I live on Barrett Road and they plaster Barrett Road during hospital days and nobody parks.
The no parking temporary police order. signs.
Correct.
The ones that we have, excuse me, have are cardboard. So I'd probably order some of the more plastic durable ones, but it's an idea.
Just a thought. I mean, I know Bob is back there.
The only issue I see is if you take the signs down and somebody's looking for a parking spot, they are going to park there. So if they're a seasonal thing, unless you actually have it written on signs, which means I have to get a bunch special ordered. I do not have anything in stock like that. But that would be how we'd have to address that. I mean, on William Street, we have signs we put up, and we take down. That's our way of seasonal at the moment.
Right. But don't you have to order permanent signs?
I have some in stock, pretty much planned ahead. But as far as the ones that would say seasonal, I don't have anything like that.
Okay. I have written testimony from Donna Sparks and Nancy Putnam and Ed Blanchard, as well as Donald and Susan Cox. And I know some others have spoken. Is there anyone else impacted by this that would like to make a comment? Okay, so Janet or Bill, your thoughts, comments?
I guess I would agree with, sorry, Jay, the Barnes recommendation to park on the Putnam side of the street with regard to Everett Park. It just seems to me more logical to be able to come down, people will come down William Street and they will look left. And if there are a lot of cars there, I think that's an issue. This one's probably not as popular. I don't think it's a good idea to park in Everett Park. Mainly because there is no place to really turn around except someone's driveway. And so there's no egress other than one way. And I think that's an issue, a safety issue. And I think I'm sorry, Pressey Court. And I think that impacts the people who live in that section of town. So I would rather, since there's not a lot of parking available anyway, I would say eliminate that. And I'm sorry, but I think you're going to add so much that it's not going to be necessary to park in Pressey Court. Bill?
I basically agree with what Janet just said.
So are you stating then that they'll be able to park on all of Everett Park on that one side of the street? So that when you come down William Street and you make a right-hand turn, you're going to need to turn around. In order. Right, but so if you go right, there's no parking at that part of Everett Park. Is that what we're saying?
I think what Janet just said is to allow parking on
Yep.
this side and this side. Is that what you just said? Is that what you said as well, Nancy? I misunderstood it.
So you come down William Street and you're turning right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm coming from Main Street. I am guessing that most people will come from Main Street to park, not down Parkside and turn left onto Everett Park. I don't think, unless you're really familiar with this community. And since we are talking about a lot of summer people who attend the barn, I think that most of the traffic will be traveling on Main Street. And it would be more logical to come down William Street if you can't find a place in the barn playhouse parking lot, come down, turn left, and then you can park. Exactly.
If you turn right, the suggestion is that you park on that side of the street.
Yeah, that would make sense. Right.
There's just going to be some zigging, zagging stuff, which is fine. We're just from our standpoint, we're looking from a consistency. And I would concur that naturally that does make sense. But it's just a narrow street, so you do have some, and then you also have a hydrant on that side of the street. We're looking at signage. I mean, it was, as I said, multifaceted, but it's all good.
Chief Cobb, were you going to say something else?
I do. I just want to make sure that folks are, well, I guess that people understand on Pressey Court and even on Everett Park that, I mean, no parking is no parking. So the folks that live on the side where parking is not allowed, even having a yard sale or an event at your home wouldn't allow for parking. And I don't know if this is popular or unpopular or not, but is there a possibility of no event parking? So kind of along the lines of what you're saying about seasonal, but no playhouse park. I don't know.
If I have a yard sale, is that an event?
Right. So yeah. Words are important.
Exactly. So I guess that's just why I'm wondering about the seasonal aspect. And I don't know if Janet or Bill, you have a comment on that.
It should be just seasonal. I don't think we want to do this year round. And I can't imagine that there wouldn't be a way to put a sign at the entrance to Pressey Court saying no parking, so that people won't even pull in. They won't think that they can park in there.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's just no parking is for everybody. No parking is no parking. So
But if we decide that it's going to be seasonal, it's seasonal.
sure. Yeah, much like the winter
Right.
parking ban.
Can have your yard sales before the barn starts and after.
You got a question?
Keith.
I by no means mean to come across as greedy, and I know that if we talk about Pressey in the other side, so we're not dealing with the turnaround at the end of the night, that it is probably 3 cars, maybe. Would there be consideration of making the other side of Pressey Court available to park so that we didn't have that turnaround at the end of the night and even going, I mean, they would go to Sawyer Lane at the top of the evening and they would end up having to turn around at the top of the evening to face the other direction, but then they would be pointed towards Main Street to come straight out in that direction. Again, by no means we're talking about then at that point in time, 3 spots, but it may be maybe easier to just say no parking for consistency's sake, but it would be additional cars.
Well, it just seems to me that you're going to have cars turning around in people's driveways all the time. And I think that's intrusive. And I don't think, for 3 spaces or 4 spaces, that this is really something that's absolutely necessary. And certainly I don't want to take any parking away from the Barn Playhouse. And I know that we do have an issue with parking in this community, but I think for safety's sake and not to drive the neighbors nuts, maybe it would be better not to do that.
Appreciate that.
So Janet, are you suggesting that there's no parking on Pressey Court and Sawyer?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure that people understood that.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
not even going into Pressey.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Janet,
Chief Cobb, I don't know whether this is a good idea or not, but is it possible if you have no parking signs on the side of the road that you're not supposed to park on during the winter or at times when there would be a yard sale, is there such a thing as putting a black or an orange or a red shroud over that sign that simply suggests to people that they can ignore it for that particular event or time or whatever?
I see what you're saying, but I think that's a mixed signal to send to folks, and also the administrative layer of that. Who would put that out? Would the officers, are we responsible for knowing when yard sales are taking place? So then therefore parking wouldn't be applied. That's not something that I think is the best use of the officer's time to put that over that. I see what you're saying. And while trying to be respectful of people who own homes on these roads and might want to have someone park in front of their house for a dinner party.
Okay.
I think we've done that before, like for voting when it was at Whipple, some of the spots in the back, we've put that over there.
Bob, and then Nancy Putnam.
If we did a set of signs, first of all, I'd put permanent signs at the corners anyway, say no parking here to corner. That should be the case on even Pressey Court.
Correct.
What I was wondering, if we're going to do a seasonal, what I come up with is maybe something like no parking from June 1st to September 15th. I don't know if something like that would work, or if you went June 1st to October 1st, something like that. It still doesn't address yard sales and functions, but it addresses the barn.
Nancy?
I agree with Bob. If we can do it seasonally, the main problem is to think about snow removal. I'm sure a lot of you in New London live on streets where that big, huge plow comes through in between storms. If you are putting signs permanently year round, including in the winter, those plow guys are going to really hate us because they'll have to be picking that blade up. I don't know how frequently they put them. Bob, you might know, but it would be, it'll be zigzag, exactly. And so if there's a way to do it the way you've done it on Williams, where the signs go up on June 1st and go down in September, just my suggestion. But the main thing, just to reiterate with all the safety people, this is a safety issue for us primarily because you cannot get emergency vehicles through when both sides are parked on Everett Park or Williams or Pressey. And it seems to me at this point, you've freed up so much space with your parking lot and with others. I agree with Jen, just eliminate Pressey Court. It doesn't seem it's necessary. It's for people turning around in driveways. They do it all the time. So it's like, that's the least of our concerns.
My only concern with putting the signs up and taking them down, that's a lot of signs. We do that now on William Street. That's going to take 2 guys, usually about 4 hours to get the signs out, to get them set up. So now we're talking about adding a lot more out there, and then there's the storage for them also. I'd probably feel better if they were just permanent.
Okay. Yes.
Nancy Donnelly, I live on 31 Sawyer Lane. Am I understanding that you're going to make Pressey and Sawyer Lane no parking at all? Is that where this discussion is going, or is there going to be parking on one side?
No, at this point, there is a proposal, although we haven't taken a vote,
Right.
obviously, but a recommendation, if you will, that there not be parking on Sawyer Lane or Pressey Court. And we are also discussing a proposal that the no parking would be seasonal.
Okay, so then my concern is, suppose someone has to have a tree taken down and they come in with a crane that goes up 100 feet. What do the people do then to allow that kind of equipment to come in if there is no parking? And also people that use lawn services and have trucks and stuff, what are they supposed to do then?
Well, I think lawn people might be able to use your driveway relative to a large crane. I don't know if we make exceptions. But any thoughts?
If your house is on fire or so, there's another emergency, we will park wherever we need to. So
I've never been able to not get somewhere yet, but it's been close a couple of times. Is there an option for these permanent seasonal no parking signs to say no playhouse parking? I mean, without trying to point the finger at the barn, but that's kind of why we're here, is because I mean, it's a wonderful thing for our community, of course, but is it possible for them? I mean, I know we have to have them made up, but would that alleviate some of the things that people want to have events at their house? They can still have people park in front of their home. It's just no event. No
barn.
What are we gonna say? Yeah, no barn parking.
Bob, do you have a comment on that?
The only issue I have is that limits people that want to park their barn on the side of the road. I think, I can get anything letted up. So that's not an issue. It's just,
Okay, so you don't have the sign, so.
I
we-
do not have something
Okay.
special. I'm thinking I'd probably have about a 2-week to 3-week lead time. I'm hoping. I ordered signs not long ago and I got them within a couple weeks. So there is some things available in this world.
I can't imagine how you could enforce a no barn parking sign. Did the police knock on every door on the house and say, is that a dinner guest of yours? I mean, it just,
Well,
but
I
I
mean, you
think,
raise a- yeah, go ahead,
I
sorry.
think one side of the street parking makes good sense, because then if someone is entertaining company, they can park on the other side of the street if necessary.
I don't know if I have a response to yeah. He's raised a valid point.
Okay. What's your pleasure? I think we should close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
I move we close the public hearing.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And do we have a proposal? I think we should take it in parts.
Okay.
I would first suggest that we discuss Pressey Court and Sawyer Lane with a motion to, well, let's start with a motion about seasonal parking as opposed to permanent parking. I think that would be
Okay.
recommendation, then we can go through it.
Okay. I move that we prohibit seasonal, or just allows, prohibit seasonal parking on Pressey Court and Sawyer Lane, and have signage at the entrance to Pressey Court indicating that there is no parking for playhouse, for the playhouse. Does that make sense? No. No parking for everybody? No, just for the Playhouse. Seasonal. I don't know, tie date up.
Well, it seems that Pressey Court should probably be permanently no parking, kind of like Williams. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know whether there are issues at other times of the year.
Okay. Bill, do you have a second or?
I will second Janet's motion, and I think the addendum I'd like to put onto that, Janet, is that at the end of this season on October 1st, that we review all of this
Okay.
to see what, that this be a
Mhm.
proposal to extend through September 30th, and that we then review the results.
Sure. Makes sense.
Okay, and are we in agreement that seasonal would be sometime in June through September
15.
15th?
Mhm.
Okay. So we have a motion. Bill has added an addendum. Do we have a second?
You want a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so what about the rest of the parking relative to the street parking for Everett Park?
Okay. I move that we allow parking on Everett Park on the, and I'm not sure which side of the Putnams are on what side of the street. Is that the right side or the left? side?
Well,
Where the green is, yeah, where the, based on the suggestion of the Barn Playhouse.
Second.
okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So Bob will be in charge of,
Just clarifying.
yes,
Oh, sorry. So on Everett Park between Williams and Parkside, it will be no parking on the odd side of the street, exactly how the map up there is reflected.
Correct.
correct.
And then so on Everett Park between Williams and what's the next one down? Prescott, thank you, Prescott. It will be no parking on the even side of the road.
Right, we go to
Okay.
the other side of the street, correct. And the signs will be seasonal.
Right.
I'll look to Bob for that, just relative to what he can get in terms of how quickly he can get that signage. But something that's reasonable. And there will be no parking on Pressey Court or Sawyer Lane.
What we could probably do on that is just a sign at the entrance to all three roads out there that just say no parking from June 1st to September 15th on this side, or actually out there, just no parking. And then on the other roads, I
Right.
was thinking no parking this side. Because obviously it's going to be opposite where the parking is, and it would be June 1st to September 15th. Does that sound correct?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. Keith?
I'm going to update this based on decisions. Is there a person that I should consult with an updated draft before that is what is shared? I feel like I do understand what it is, but just to put it in front of someone's eyes before that's what's shared with.
If you give it to Kim, I'm sure she's going to run it by both chiefs and Bob Harrington. So
Great, thank you.
the other thing is we will continue to have discussions with the SAU about the potential of using this parking lot. I think particularly for staff, that makes sense. But we'll see.
Williams Street, did you address Williams? That's I don't know. I don't remember if you took a motion for Williams for no parking. on both sides.
I actually always assumed it was no parking, but do
right,
we want
yeah.
to take a vote on?
No, that's fine. Forgive me if you already had.
Okay. Nancy? Well, it's because of the construction. Yep, and Bob is nodding his head affirmatively. So, yeah. John?
Thank you. If you could pursue parking at the school, that would be so wonderful, and we would be happy to speak to anyone who is who you'd like us to speak to about that. And finally, thank you for all of your attentions. We're having an open house on July 8th for all of the community to come and see the new barn playhouse, and there'll be more announcements about that, but just we wanted to open our doors and show you the new barn playhouse and all its resplendent pleasure and new construction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bring your own parking.
You can walk.
Okay,
Thank you. You want to let people leave maybe if they want to?
yeah, if people were here only for the parking and you want to leave, we'll give you a few minutes to exit. Thank you for coming. Also, we have a very heavy agenda this evening. I would like this meeting not to go beyond 7:30. I think that we'll get through what we can get through, and then we will bring it into the next meeting. I don't think it makes sense for everyone to be here for a long period of time. Okay.
Nancy, point of order. I thought our meetings went for 2 hours.
I don't know that we have that in stone, but
That's what the rules of procedure say.
fine, then we won't go past 8 o'clock. Public comments on anything that is not on the agenda? Okay, let's go to old business. If people could keep their conversations down while we try to continue to go through the agenda, that would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, proposal for services, Whipple Hall upgrade project. Phil and Frank, are you going to speak to that? Putnam? Yeah, thank you.
My name is Phil Sherman. I'm representing the Whipple Hall Subcommittee of the Building and Facilities Committee. You've seen 2 emails setting out Frank Anzalone's proposal for design services for what I think of as phase 3 of the Whipple Hall work. You'll recall we had a utility upgrade several years ago. We're in the process now of dealing with acoustic panels, sound systems, and window shades. That's crunching slowly toward delivery of the last parts. And then this is the design work to go through the work that was approved through the warrant article. You'll note that the scope is pretty loose. It's broad. We're not thinking of this as anything other than just a broad approach that gets the discussion going. But basically the design will break into 2 parts. What are we going to design, and then design it and then build it after that, right? So somehow or another, we will need to reach agreement as with the selectmen as to when to come back to you and say, here's where we want to head. Do you agree? Or here's where we think we might head. Do you agree? And step through these fees in a similar manner. I would suggest that what we're asking tonight is to get going so that we can get the conversation going. We'll work closely with Kim, who can keep you all informed, and then get back at the 5-10% level, when we get our thoughts in order and know where we're proposing to head, there will be decisions that need to be made early on, and then talk more closely about fees as we go on from there. Frank Anzalone, the architect, is with me tonight, and we certainly can answer any questions.
Questions? Bill, Janet? I think it would be great if we could move this ahead and get going. There's no question. I do know that things are taking an enormous amount of time in terms of supply chain issues. So we'll do the best that we can to get this completed. Correct. Okay, let's take a vote. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve the recommendation of the Building and Facilities Subcommittee on the proposed scope of work for architect Anzalone.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Frank. Okay, I'm going to open this up to the old business topic, the discussion of governance initiatives that was proposed by Selectman Helm several weeks ago. I'd like to ask Selectman Helm to give some information and background relative to his thinking relative to these proposals in order to begin the discussion.
Good, thanks, Nancy, and bear with me. I'm only going to talk for a couple of minutes because I want to continue. I think we all want to continue to hear what other people have to say, but I'd like to begin by reviewing how we got to tonight's discussion. 4 weeks ago, as Nancy suggests, I set forth a series of suggestions for improving the governance of the town, but there was not adequate time on the agenda for me to provide my rationale for those proposals. Nancy, Janet, and I agreed that we needed some time to think about these proposals before taking them up at a future meeting, which is tonight. It was also suggested that getting input from various town bodies made sense. In the interim, some folks have understandably expressed some real frustration at the absence of a context or framework for considering the proposals. And that's because we didn't have that opportunity 4 weeks ago. Hopefully we can ameliorate that frustration tonight with a healthy discussion. I urge all of us to listen, and I emphasize listen, to each other respectfully and to consider the pros and cons of what is being proposed. I have to say that I've heard some rumblings in recent days suggesting that there's some animus with my proposals. Let me be clear right now. My sole objective is to address what, from my observations and experience, are opportunities to improve the effectiveness of our town governance. 5 points in my proposal are really a package of interrelated suggestions that are intended, 1, to promote the independence of elected town boards on the Selectmen and the Budget Committee, and 2, to provide efficient and timely input to the Selectmen as we, quote, manage the prudential affairs of the town as prescribed under state statute. Proposals 1 and 2, dealing with the membership of the Selectmen and the Budget Committee members on other boards and committees, accomplishes the first objective, that is, to promote the independence of elected town boards. Under this proposal, no Selectman or Budget Committee member, for the purpose of determining a quorum or for voting on matters to be addressed subsequently by the Selectmen or Budget Committee, as the case may be, would also be a member of another committee whose members are appointed. It's important, whose members are appointed by the Selectmen. This does not preclude individual Selectmen or Budget Committee members from attending any meeting as a resident of the community, while understanding that they do have a special standing as an elected member of the governing body. For example, Nancy has attended some meetings of the Fire Wards and the Housing Commission in recent months, both bodies where her professional knowledge may well be appreciated. And that certainly would be something that I would hope would continue. The third proposal, the formation by the selectmen of time-limited ad hoc advisory panels to address specific topics for action by either the selectmen or the town meeting, is intended to provide for town-specific input on pending decisions, as opposed to the work of permanent bodies that deal with ongoing topics such as energy, conservation, housing, or recreation, to name a few. Examples of current topics that would benefit from such examination include, as Phil was just saying, completion of the Whipple Hall renovations, future use of the Bucher building if the police department relocates, and a plan for the handling and recycling of waste materials within existing facilities. These time-limited groups may also provide opportunities for new volunteers to participate in the governance activities of the town. The fifth proposal establishes a new permanent committee as provided for in the statutes to perform an annual capital improvement plan, responsibility now performed by the planning board. Since this proposal requires town meeting approval, I suggest we table it for the time being. Just gonna get a little water here. Now, the proposal to dissolve the solid waste committee as currently constituted is intended to acknowledge that the earlier work of this committee to consider an expanded or new transfer station was tabled following a completion of a solid waste management facility study in November 2017. This committee, in fact, has not met since November 2020. I personally would suggest that some members of this committee be among those selected to carry out the proposed focused waste material ad hoc group. Finally, the proposal to dissolve the Building and Facilities Committee is more complicated because some of its activities have been examples of very good advisory efforts, but its overall structure has, in my observation, decreased its effectiveness as a source of input to the selectmen. Building and Facilities Subcommittee advising on the renovation and repair of Whipple has been very useful. Thank you, Phil. And should be continued for the time being as one of the proposed ad hoc groups. Likewise, the subcommittee addressing possible sites for a new police facility has just completed a very useful report, which I hope the selectmen will be able to address in the very near future. Less effective has been the structure of the Building and Facilities Committee that funnels subcommittee work back through the entire committee, resulting in delays and reworking of subcommittee work. In both the Whipple and the police site situations, I believe the work of these subcommittees should by now be directly on the selectmen's agenda. Based on recent attendance at 3 Building and Facility Committee meetings, it is my observation that too much effort is spent defining purpose versus addressing specific matters requested by the selectmen. For example, it is not clear why the Building and Facilities Committee has taken on some transfer station questions when a solid waste committee exists but has not met since 2020, and why there's confusion about the role of the Building and Facilities Committee in the CIP process, which I will not go into here unless somebody wants to. Were the Building and Facilities Committee to be dissolved at this time, I believe that its current members would or could be asked to continue work on some of the specific topics enumerated above. My thanks go to those individuals who provided some input to me over the past month. I now look forward to an opportunity for all of us to consider more thoughts tonight and for the selectmen to act on these proposals as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Any comments, Janet, at this point?
No, I think I'd rather hear from the members of the public who are here tonight.
Okay, I'm going to open it up. Peter?
It's my understanding from what Bill said in reading the minutes of the April 14th meeting that the select board has not yet had a chance to discuss these issues amongst themselves, that their opinion on some of these issues may be very relevant to how people in this audience and other people in town feel. So I would assume that the select board would have to come up with their opinions as to Bill's recommendation before we open it up to the general public, because I think that's a better procedure than to simply say, we've got these things, now let the public worry about it. Then after that, selectmen will make their decision. I think it's imperative that this is, some of these issues, in my opinion, are quite critical, and that guidance from the elected Board of Selectmen would be very important to have. So I'm sort of asking a question of procedure. So should the Select Board come up with their own recommendations before we open to the public meeting? I know, and I think everybody's just been involved in this kind of thing. We know that the 3 selectmen could not have discussed this anytime between the 14th and tonight because it was not on any agenda. So any discussion that they had would be illegal because they can't do it. So right now, I don't know, and maybe other people do, the position of the various selectmen. Obviously, Bill has a position since he wrote these, and Janet and Nancy obviously have wanted time to study them. But I'd like to know what before comments about the makeup of these actual recommendations, I'd like to know the consensus of the Select Board as to how they feel about these 5 points in detail. Thank you.
Okay. Is there a response to that? Well, I don't
I
think,
could just say, Peter, I can tell you that I have not spoken to either Janet or Nancy about any of these proposals since the 14th of April, and they have not seen the document from which I was reading tonight prior to my reading it a few minutes ago. The point was being made that we shouldn't be allowed, and I want to make the point that, to my knowledge, I have not been involved in that, nor has there been any advanced copies of what I just said passed out to anybody.
well, I find this an interesting position. I certainly have my thoughts and opinions relative to this. You asked for a consensus on our position, Peter, which we won't have that since we haven't had the discussion. And actually, as I heard Bill go through his proposal tonight, I heard some slight variations on what I had heard back on April 14th. And I think it continues to be unfortunate that we don't get things in writing, at least in front of us, so I can respond to them. And I think that's been a challenge in terms of how this proposal has come about and been presented both times. That's my opinion. Quite frankly, I can go through all of these and will, relative to my opinion. The selectmen not on committees other than budget and planning. I agree that they should not be voting members. My attendance at the Housing Commission, Board of Fire Wards, and anything else that I have attended, I don't see myself as a member that has a voting right or privilege, nor am I considered part of the quorum, and I accept that. I choose to attend those committees because I have an interest in them, and I do have a background in many of those areas. Bill's item relative to his recommendation that budget committee members not be on other committees. Other than statutory language specific to the budget committee makeup, it's only relative to the planning board that planning board members can't be on other committees. I don't see a problem with budget committee members being on another committee. And budget committee members, the budget committee is made up of individuals who work together as a group. They're not any one vote. It is the collective vote of the committee. So I don't see a problem with that. I would rather discuss number 4 prior to number 3. I think that the reason that has been stated for dissolving the Building and Facilities Committee, I don't agree with. I think if there is a concern relative to how any one group functions or processes or works, that there should be a conversation with that committee, with the chair or whatever, and a discussion take place. We have many volunteers and volunteers on that committee who are very well qualified, who have worked very hard, who have produced a number of documents relative to having the first overall look and plan for all of the buildings that we invest in and have money for. And I think that needs to be honored. If you don't like the way a committee operates, you need to have a conversation with them first. These are volunteers. The Solid Waste Management Committee, I know there was a reason that that group stopped, that there was a lack of a chair for a time period. There were a few members that were still attending. It kind of waned. The board should have asked for either a renewed interest in that committee and not just go ahead and say, well, we're going to dissolve something because it hasn't met for such a period of time. Quite frankly, I think that every committee, with perhaps exception of the budget and planning, should be asked to come in on a periodic basis and present to the board relative to what they're working on, what their goals are, what their objectives are, and what their outputs have been. Goes back to what I have been asking for relative to a dashboard around what are the big projects and obligations that we're working on in this town and what is the status of them. We still don't have that. That said, I don't think that committees should necessarily just be dissolved because someone doesn't like the way they're operating. I don't think that's a valid nor fair statement. Time-limited advisory panels, you can certainly have them as subcommittees relative to other groups. But what I do find when a group starts is they need to have a charter, and the charter needs to be clear expression of what the Board of Selectmen expects them to do. And who's going to monitor that? Is that one more obligation that we put on Kim? Both for taking notes or other kinds of things. I think we need to be judicious in how many panels and groups and things that we have and how we can do our work. And so perhaps we need to revisit the overall governance of the town of New London. And then revisit with the planning board the formation of the separate CIP committee. Statutorily, the CIP is the product of the planning board. And it did come out of the Fiscal Policy Committee as a recommendation in 2021. And as I recall, we all voted unanimously to keep the CIP under the aegis of the planning board, because that's where we believe it should be, and statutorily that is where it's assigned. And we did make recommendations for others that should be included in that, because it is somewhat prescripted in the statute relative to who should participate on the CIP. So that's my response. That's my feeling relative to this proposal. And I'll look to Janet to make her responses.
Okay. With regard to the selectmen not on committees other than budget and planning, I do think that selectmen can influence a particular committee. Having served on the Recreation Commission, I definitely know that I influenced some of the things that the decisions that they made. I know I did. I'm going to be honest about that. So I do realize that this can happen, and not necessarily it is something that represents the whole board, but perhaps one person's opinion. With regard to budget committee members not on other committees, I really think they should stay solely on the budget committee. Go to committee meetings, but I have found, or I've been concerned over the past couple of years of some of the proposals made by some members on a couple of committees that had budget implications. So that does concern me. With regard to small advisory panels, I think the subcommittee for Whipple, they've done a great job coming up with proposals. I am concerned about a broad group like the Building and Facilities Committee. I think that I've noticed that I've checked how many meetings they've had, and they've had 74 meetings over the last few years. And we've only come up with a couple of proposals for Whipple. So the concern for me with that is that they are also meeting with our department heads and our employees, and all of the time that they have spent on these issues has taken away from department heads running their department. That bothers me. That concerns me. So I think it would be better if we re-looked at all our committees and decided what it is we want them to do and give them a direction that they follow. Just one particular thing, like Whipple, please finish Whipple, that sort of thing. So with regard to the CIP committee, I definitely believe that that belongs with the planning board. This past year, there was one member from the Building and Facilities Committee on it. There were 2 planning board members, and I believe there were 2 budget committee members. So the recommendations that they made to the planning board, which was approved after public hearings, I think it was well vetted. So that's where I am on these things at this point.
Okay. So is that, okay, Peter?
As one who is no longer directly involved in town activities at the moment, I found it extremely useful meeting before last, when there was a proposal by Mr. Helm to purchase the Stallman building. I found it very useful to have information that came from this committee, the Building and Facilities Committee, that didn't necessarily point in that direction. It was nice to have a kind of a third party look at this that was informing citizens as to why or why not we should be spending $1 million. And $1 million is nothing now compared with what I have heard with regard to the elephant in the room, which is the police station. Most recently, the attempt to get the selectmen to purchase or put on the warrant an article to purchase the Pressey property for $3.5 million. Well, again, it's useful to have this committee that doesn't necessarily agree with every single person on the Board of Selectmen, rather than have this become an emotional decision made on the basis of what one person wants, as opposed to what the town actually needs. I think you need to listen to some of the people who don't necessarily tell you what you want to hear. In fact, it's a big mistake. That's called having yes men or yes people on your staff. It's not a good thing. And although they may exist for the purpose of informing the selectmen, they're also existing for the purpose of informing taxpayers who are going to have to vote yay or nay on some of these proposals that come up. So eliminating communication and doing away with people who produce those pesky facts that often seem to get in the way of proposals that some people want to pursue. I think it's a huge, huge mistake and is the opposite of transparency in government. It's moving in just the wrong direction. So my feeling is, keep your committee, by all means, advise the committee on how they might improve their strategies and their process, by all means, but by no means should you be looking for every possible avenue to get rid of them and have only the people who tell you what you want to hear. I think that's a huge, huge mistake. So I would be very cautious going down that road. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Peter?
Since I brought this up, now I understand where
the board feels on some of these things. So I can be happy to give my 2 cents for what it's worth on some of these issues. I'm a little, had some questions about what panels are as opposed to committees, but I do think that there is a time where we should have term limits for people on committees. The only committee in town that I know of that has term limits is the Citizens Advisory Committee. And if I'm wrong on this, I'll be happy to be corrected on this. The use of the selectmen as members of other committees, even though it's not statutorily provided, the history that I've been involved in for 12 years as a selectman, that if a selectman were assigned to the budget committee and or the planning board, their job was not to present their view in opposition to what the selectmen might have voted, but to simply inform that committee where they stood, and whether it's right or wrong, or you agree or not agree, that the person on that committee represents the selectmen's voted position on any issue. So I think that's makes the value of selectmen on committees very important, because throughout the time or deliberations on budget, a select member can say, yeah, we put in this for a particular item, a fire truck, a grader, or paving the roads with this amount, here's why. Not giving their opinion, but why the selectmen did it. So I think that it's important, and I have no problem with a select person being on another committee, because the select people are one of the 2 boards in town that's elected. And I think they have, as with most people in town, a real desire and love for the town to see it go well. And so I think that their opinion on other committees is valuable. I have a couple other comments here. I was on the committee with Bill that recommended that the CIP be a separate entity, so to speak. And it was voted by the board not to do it. My position of that is, so be it. That's the way things are supposed to happen. A small committee makes a recommendation. The 3 of you, or the 3 selectmen, approve or disapprove of the recommendation. The last point I want to make is we have 17 appointed committees in town, and by a quick count, we have 130 people involved in this. Historically, there has been a problem getting people to man these committees. I can remember sitting where you folks were, the meeting after the town meeting, they say, okay, now who's going off this committee? Well, Johnny's been on there for 12 years. Let's get rid of him. No, let's not get rid of him. There's no guidelines as far as term limits. Then you say, well, fine, if we get rid of Johnny, who's going to take their place? Well, everybody say, well, I know so-and-so, they seem like a nice person. Maybe they'll do it. And my recollection, right or wrong, is it was difficult getting people to volunteer for some of these committees. And volunteering for these committees is very important to the whole functioning of the town. They've been applauded at town meetings for many, many years. And so I think it's a real problem not to have many people be put on these committees, even though they may double up on a committee. There's no sense of wasting talent just because I know a lot about computers and I also know a lot about trucks that I should be prevented from being on any committee that may talk about that. The last thing I want to mention is reference to the committee that I did serve on for almost 2 years, the Building Facilities Committee. In my 12 years as selectman, I've never been on a committee that has worked longer and harder. I don't know, I think Janet, you might have mentioned how many times they've met, 70 something times over the last couple of years. And these weren't just quick meetings. They were 2-hour meetings. When you have a lawyer running the show, my good friend Bob Bowers. We know what happens. I'm only kidding, Bob, but I have never seen a committee with more expertise on the subject they were supposed to make recommendations on. So I am 100% against trying to dissolve that committee. The committee does have, after much work, a charter that we asked the select board to approve. So there was a charter that I think Bill wasn't on the board when we approved that charter, but I know Janet was and Nancy was on that. And we spent a lot of time making sure that the charter is what the select board wanted. The Building Facilities Committee did have to figure out where they were going, but I think the whole process came out to the benefit of the town and tremendous information was gleaned from it. So I am 100% against any dissolving of that committee. And the other thing that any people on committee that the selectmen don't like, you folks appoint them. Don't appoint them. That's it. Very simple. If you don't like me on a committee or you don't like so-and-so on a committee, every year, if their term is up, you say, fine, let's get rid of Bianchi or let's get rid of so-and-so. That's your choice. Because all the committees that are appointed by the select board. So having listened to your comments, I appreciate you listening to my babbling. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin?
Colin Beasley, can we approach this item by item as opposed to generally? Is that another way of approaching the matter?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Colin.
Can we approach this 5 issues by number instead of generally speaking about them?
However you would like to respond to them.
Is the intention of the select board to vote on each one individually?
I would imagine, but I don't think we're at a point of
Okay.
taking a vote. So we opened it up to general comments, but you can comment on one particular item over
Well,
another.
the reason why I'm asking is I have comments on all 5, so I don't know whether you want to listen to all 5 or what.
Sure, why don't you go ahead?
So my comments come in if somebody wants to step in while I'm talking, because there's a relevant comment to make on your part, just feel free to interrupt me. I have questions that precede my comments. So my first question as relates to Mr. Helm's number 1, selectmen on the committees other than budget and planning. Directed to Mr. Helm, how would the select board gather information about what the committees are working on?
I believe that Nancy said earlier that we should be reinstituting something that we used to do in other years, which is on a regular basis, having each committee come before the Board of Selectmen, either on a schedule or on an as-needed basis. I think that it's very important that the Board of Selectmen be engaged directly in the activities of the committees and not through various layers, which I indicated before. So it was simply, what would happen is on our agendas on a regular basis, the various committees or advisory groups would come before the Board of Selectmen, just as Nancy suggested.
I think that the suggested changes would, notwithstanding that answer, decouple the select board from the various committees. You have 2 meetings a week, 2 hours a meeting. I'm sorry, 2 meetings by every 2 weeks. You have 2 meetings a month. Excuse me, 2 hours each meeting. So a lot of times having the select board at the meetings themselves, and I've seen it play out here where you can provide input to the other select board members as to what's playing out in those meetings, provides an information flow back and forth where you can get informed. I don't know how you would schedule, and I guess you can try it certainly, getting information from the committees themselves at each of your meetings. So I would ask that we play the movie out, as you play the movie out, as you think through the governance process. If you're not attending the meetings as select board members, that you figure out how that would incorporate into your time slots on governance and getting information in from the various committees. Frankly, I think that we should be proposing changes that pursue greater coordination between committees, as well as between committees and the select board, not less. And having committees structured in silos would only yield less coordinated initiatives. I think more progress can be made through a collective learning process in coordinating our approach to our challenges, and the obvious connectivity between the committees is the select board. So I would ask that as you think through that, you think through how your schedule at these meetings can accommodate that information flow. I also acknowledge the value of periodically assessing the committee structure, including the CIP. And I think the select board should look for governance changes that engage them more with the committee and to explore alternatives for greater collaboration between the committees and the select board. Rather than adopting proposals, the proposal that you highlight, Mr. Helm, perhaps it might be more beneficial to the community if you adopt a motion to establish an advisory panel of volunteers from the various committees, perhaps committee chairs, to discuss and explore alternatives and, if appropriate, develop recommendations along with transition suggestions, perhaps to be reviewed by the CIC for their input prior to presentation to the select board. The object should be to study governance changes that promote both community involvement and selectmen's participation and leadership in that process. In one exception, in addition to a review process, I do believe that we need to look at the budget committee representation relative to the law and who can and can't be on that committee. And we talked a little bit briefly about this before, but I do think that we need to understand that. And I would ask the selectmen to, if they haven't already, encourage legal counsel to review that. I'm going to flip to number 2 unless somebody else wants to talk about number 1. On number 2, I have a couple of questions as well. For Mr. Helm, what do you think is the downside of having folks in the budget committee who are informed about what and where the community is going?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question, Colin.
You're looking for, you're suggesting that there should be, anybody who's on the budget committee should not be in any other committee. And so what I'm asking you is, what do you think the downside of that participation is? Why is that an issue?
I think as I said in my opening remarks, I think the issue is one of independence. Janet referred to this in terms of the time that she was on the Recreation Commission. I think it's inevitable that somebody from the Budget Committee who is sitting on a committee that's asking for money becomes engaged in that committee's desire to do that and then becomes an advocate for it. And the other members of the Budget Committee have not had the same opportunity. And so I would rather see proposals that come from any committee for money to go directly to the full Budget Committee and not through perhaps somebody else who's been there. But I also think that there is some room for this reason for having these proposals is there's some room for discussion about whether it's anybody or whether it might be appropriate in some cases to have one or two, as the planning board has some rules about how many other land use committees people can sit on, for example, which are worth thinking about. So in this particular case, I think I feel less strongly about this one than I do about the selectmen being on other committees, but it's well worth part of the discussion. And I appreciate actually that you're going through this and raising questions about governance also, because the headline, if you recall, of my whole proposal here 4 weeks ago, and I said it again tonight, is I want to make sure that we have effective governance of this town, period.
Thank you for that. And so I have a couple of comments. I think that unless I misunderstood you, I don't know that committees ask for money. And certainly from a BFC point of view, we don't ask for money. We provide data and supporting evidence for one decision or another. And it's the town who is looking for what would get funded and what wouldn't based on those facts. So I don't know that, I guess my general comment is that I think limiting a person's participation in multiple committees, I would encourage us not to do that. I think we should be welcoming community participation. And I think we should be seeking greater participation in the various committees in a manner that cross-pollinates the committees and brings committee participation into the budgeting process. I don't think there's anything wrong, frankly, with having some members of the budget committee who can bring intelligence to the budget committee based on their experiences in the various meetings that lends further credence to the conversation, as opposed to a budget committee who's may not have attended any meeting, trying to discern what's important and what isn't. So having some cross-pollination between the budget committee and the other committees, frankly, between committees, I think only improves the governance of the town and helps us get more informed. So that's just my comment on that. And I would also ask the select board to think through, and I'm not an expert here, and I've been doing a lot of reading as part of my budget committee responsibility, and I ran across something called the no home rule. And I would like to ask us to ask council to evaluate whether or not there is any jurisdiction of the select board over whether or not the budget committee can or cannot have people who are attending other meetings, other committees. I know that the statute is very clear about the planning board and how it can and cannot participate in other committees. It is not clear about, does not mention in any shape, way, or form whether or not a budget committee member has those restrictions. And again, so I'm just wondering whether or not there's any application there. And again, I just want to play the movie out that we understand the law of unintended consequences, that we check with council as to what restrictions we can or can't execute across that playing field. Does anybody have anything on 2? Because I can go on to 3. I want to actually.
Colin, I might just
Please,
add that,
yeah.
there's the easiest way to deal with the point that you're making is that the selectmen do make the appointments to these other committees. And so I don't think we need a legal opinion. The selectmen could simply have a house rule of their own that they will not appoint person A to committee B if they don't want to. So I think there's lots of ways we can handle it. I'm not anxious to see us get into more legal wranglings right now. This is supposed to be a sort of a friendly family discussion about how to improve the governance of the town.
No, please
I
don't
need
mistake.
more lawyers.
Please don't mistake. And I don't want to get into legal wranglings either. I really just wanted to make sure that we're covering the bases, right? That's all I'm saying. And I listen. I'm going to be selfish here, right? I'm on the budget committee and I'm on the BFC. So I'm going to let's make an assumption that BFC exists. If you execute on number 2, the desire that has been represented, Bill, by your proposal, I would have to leave either the BFC or the planning board or the budget committee. Because at this point, my term doesn't term out until 23 or 24, I can't recall. So in effect, your proposal being adopted would shorten my term limit and I would have to leave one or the other. That's the consequence. So all I'm asking, and I don't want to, and I have no intention, please don't misunderstand me, getting in any legal. I just want us to make sure that we're dotting the i's and crossing the t's. As an organization, we're understanding all the unintended consequences. That's all I'm asking for. Okay. Now, before I go on to number 3, I really want to go on to number 4, because in fact, number 3 is part of number 4, as Nancy had indicated. And I had a couple questions for that one as well. Give me a moment. If in fact the BFC is dissolved, how does I would ask the selectmen think about how you would continue the work that it's doing, or alternatively, maybe the question is, how long will the work that's going on go into limbo? What period of time will it take for the selectmen to think through the task forces or the advisory panels that you want to create and get them staffed up, get those folks on board with respect to the work that's underway, and then get productive? So again, a lot of unintended consequences. If you blow up the BFC, by definition, all the subcommittees get blown up and all that work comes to a stop. So I think we need, that's why I indicated earlier, I think we need to play the movie out and think through what are the governance proposals that we all collectively want to adopt. What are the steps to get there? What are the transition things we should think about and allow those transitions to be executed while you get to the final state, whatever that might be. And it might take 6 months, it might take 3 months, it might take some period of time, but we should think through how we continue that work because it's important work. And obviously I'm biased because I'm on the committee, but I think it's important work. One of the questions that I did want to ask though, and I can't recall whether it was Janet, you or Bill, there was a reference, I wrote a note about, it appears that there are the subcommittee structure that the BFC has executed. There's delays and rework of the subcommittee work going on at the BFC. And I was wondering if you could provide me some examples of what you see as what's been delayed.
I was the one that made that comment, and I'm afraid this is, you know, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room now, I guess, because it is my opinion that the subcommittee that did a very good job, incidentally, on the site review work for the police station, completed its report in mid-March, and that report is publicly posted now on the town website, and yet it's not yet on the selectmen's agenda. I believe that one of the 2 or 3 most important things that the selectmen are going to have to do in the next 6 months is deal with this issue of the police site location and the ramifications for the Whipple Hall. So I think that the fact that the Building and Facilities Committee has now had at least 2 meetings to further review the subcommittee's report, apparently having asked the chair of the subcommittee to reconvene that committee and produce answers to many questions that in the meetings I sat through were already answered once, is a waste of time. And that, as far as I'm concerned, the Board of Selectmen should address the police site report immediately.
Okay, so thank you for that. I would, my response is probably multi-layered. Like the select board, the committees are meeting. We meet once a month, you meet twice a month. Part of that is when we first began to meet, we were meeting 2, sometimes 3 times a week. Hence, Janet's counting 2 or 3 times a month, excuse me. And depending upon what subcommittee you're on, you might have been meeting twice a week. And I would say that the 75 meetings, good part of those had to do with some of the earlier police station work. So we've had 2 meetings. We provided some questions to the subcommittee. In parallel, we've been working what our report would be to the select board. And our full expectations are that that report would be delivered in June. And when we look at the select board's agenda, while I understand you want it to be there quickly, you know, there is room based on our assessment, and we're going to give you this sort of guidance when we hand you our report. There's plenty of time between June and the next town meeting to accomplish those things that need to be accomplished. And if you were to attend the meetings that we're talking about this thing, you would better understand, and I'm not suggesting your attendance is an issue, but those who would attend would understand that what we're doing is going through a very deliberative process to scope out for the select board's conversation the items that they need to consider, the timelines it takes for those things to be considered, and how they interrelate so that you can really play out the movie in a manner that connects the dots between the decision and the execution and lays out for you how those interdependencies work. And we think that that's going to be very valuable to move the project along most effectively through the town, up to and including town communications. And if we did it differently, you'd have fits and starts. And we believe that what we're doing and giving you something in June is going to be the better product. But you can make that determination when we come to you.
So Colin, I do have to respectfully disagree with you, and what you've just said makes my point. I think that right now, whatever you're doing, what the Building and Facilities Committee is doing to further review the subcommittee report that has been published is the sort of thing that ought to be happening right in this room, right in front of the selectmen, so that we can be part of that discussion. So it's not all sort of parsed apart and nicely diced for us. I think this is a very, very important issue. And I think we're wasting a lot of time right now getting to June or July. And I think there's not very much time between now and when some decisions have to be made to get ready for town meeting. This is where I am probably the one point where I'm in great disagreement with what you're saying. We have a perfect example here of a work that's been done well by a committee that published a report. I sat in the last meeting where that report was put together before I became a selectman, and thought, gee, this is great. Now we're going to get right to the selectmen and be able to start to talk about multi issues here. And instead, what I see happening is another group of people, which is incidentally, there are only 3 of you on the BFC who weren't on the subcommittee. So I'm assuming it's just 3 people are now dicing what the other 3 people did, which just we're part of. And it just, to me, is a poor, very poor use of time. And I'm sorry to be on that soapbox, but, and as somebody said earlier tonight, it is the elephant in the room. But I think it's time to get on with this police work and not go back through another committee reviewing a committee's report. Thank
So
you.
I will, and we can move on, obviously. I just want to make a response because it's important. We're not slicing and dicing anything. What we're trying to do is provide a value add. If you take a look at the police station subcommittee report, there's an attachment E that lays out a number of additional variables that need to be addressed. What we're trying to do is provide with the additional people who have expertise in engineering and in project management, that overlay so that the select board can appreciate the implications of attachment E as they review attachment A, B, C, and D. And enough said on that. I mean, we can move on. What I would suggest is that considering the successful work of the BFC to date and the agenda that's being addressed by the BFC, in my view, it would be disappointing that the select board dissolves the group. It's a very skill diverse group of dedicated volunteers whose goal has been to provide to the select board facts underlying those issues and responsibilities it has been assigned. And with respect to the police station, it was assigned that task. Again, no disrespect intended, Gina, but I would like to review, if I may, the accomplishments, because it's not just 1 or 2 accomplishments. Over 75 meetings, if you go through the minutes, you'll see all the work that's been done. The accomplishments that were outlined in the annual report are a multitude. Detailed inventory of all town properties whose replacement values are in the millions of dollars to assess the going forward needs of both the property and the organization using those assets. And yes, during that process, early on, we were definitely talking to department heads and departments. I don't believe we bothered them over the last year or so, notwithstanding the police station conversations that played out. We established a subcommittee to evaluate Whipple Hall. Everyone seems very happy about that. We assessed the needs of the town space in the academy building with the conclusion that while there could be space rearrangements within the building to accommodate various departments there's no need for additional space to meet the department needs. And that's all factual based. We've identified the issue of storage for both paper and non-paper items, recommending record digitization for paper, which is commencing based on our recommendations, and further analysis of the non-paper storage requirements across all departments within the town. The town administrator owns that action item to begin the non-paper storage inventory. The outcome of this work would provide data on the future non-paper storage requirements, critical input to the information already gleaned around the DPW storage requirements, which will facilitate someone's analysis, if it's not the BSC's analysis, of building storage requirements within the town. That's a big issue, and we should be addressing that. It's been talked about since 2015, 16, storage. The committee worked with Bob Harrington on his department needs at the sewer, DPW, and transfer station sites, some of which are directly related to the storage issue noted above. We documented the Buildings and Facilities Investment Report, highlighting all of its findings, developing estimates where possible for bringing closure to those findings, and making recommendations as to the order of those investments. We recommended to the select board that the town use the state fire marshal to issue building permits and perform building inspections of commercial and multifamily projects, which the select board adopted. We performed considerable work on the police station issue, and we have folks now who I deem to be experts in this area in the town, and that expertise should be leveraged going forward. In note, Bill, I would say that at one of the meetings before you were selectman, you attended the BFC meeting, and you remarked that the BFC has done a good job, other than the police station issue. And I think that's part of the issue, is because we're going in a different direction potentially than what you want us to go in. But otherwise, you thought the BFC, in fact, you made the comment that we were doing a good job. Currently, the BFC is working on, among other things, one, Whipple Hall's modernization and infrastructure work is represented in the warrant article that was approved at March town meeting. Two, continue to work with Bob Harrington on transfer station issues and the facility management process, including project management and software requirements, to enable the town to more proactively address building and facility needs, schedule the work necessary to maintain those assets, and effectively and proactively understand the work and associated costs necessary for those locations. And three, the police station issue. And as you recall, the BFC saw great merit when we were brought back into the police station issue to broaden our participation to include the chief of the police, the lieutenant, and a planning board member, and then a citizen joined us. So we became a subcommittee of multiple people. So as we move to address the BFC, I just want to make sure that we all understand that the advisory panels that are being discussed in number 3, that we're going to get to in a moment, are in fact the subcommittees of the BFC. So I again ask the select board to think about the law of unintended consequences. If you blow up the BFC and blow up the subcommittees, what are you going to lose for time and expertise? And I would ask you to consider the effectiveness of dissolving one committee to establish multiple advisory committees. So in effect, you actually have what I would call an organizational structure where various issues of commonality, facilities, buildings, investments, are funneling up through an organization that has a diverse set of people who can provide you a packaged set of documentation, data, and all the facts, as opposed to you're trying to do that yourself. So there is merit when you have a big issue in your hands, and what you have in the BFC is a set of buildings that are worth millions of dollars in their replacement value, and to allow experts within your community volunteer their time to provide you with the data and guidance so you can make decisions, and you're not having to get into that kind of detail, in my view, is a good governance structure. Anybody want to talk about number 4 before I move on to number 3?
I just wanted to add that, we have a lot of talented individuals and a lot of smart people on these, on the select board and on the committees. And this is the time where we need to come together and work together. I mean, it's the divisiveness isn't something that's going to get us forward. We've all made some mistakes over the years. We've wasted time on the Sullivan building. We've wasted time on the land for the $3 billion, but we've got the expertise here in town. Let's work together and get this thing going. We've been talking about getting a new police station for a long time. It's time we move forward together and work together. That's all I wanted to say.
If I may, I see it's time to
We have 2 minutes before.
bring
8
this
o'clock.
to an end. And so I was going to make one point. I'd like to have another meeting where I can raise some concerns. I've sent to you all a memo, and I believe you've got it this evening. If you don't, it's in your inbox. And I would like to speak to that. But one of the points I make is that the selectmen meet bi-weekly. And it becomes very difficult for 3 people who have other lives meeting twice a month with a myriad issues on their agenda to deal with very serious and difficult issues which require detailed information, etc. To start the process of doing a different way of doing this, why don't you meet next week on this topic alone? And then you can start having meetings every week, 1 to a regular agenda, 1 to a clear topic. I have a whole list of things that have been on the selectmen's table
for years that have not been addressed. So Bill, if the selectmen want to make decisions, they could have done so. They should have done so. We need to move forward, and I agree with Bob Prohl. The way to move forward is to use the committees in a way that is productive, to sit with them and ask them questions, to take information from them and look at it and ask questions about what that might mean. There are a lot of things that could be done together. And I thank you for your time, and I move to adjourn.
Thank you, Bob.
So,
by
Bob, I would say to you that on the 14th, I also said to my colleagues that at an early date, I want us to establish what our priorities were going to be to work on this year. There's no sense having a buffet with 400 different items on it if we're only going to work on 3 or 4 of them. And so I appreciate that there are a lot of things going on, but it's realistically that we can only manage as a small town to do a certain number of things each year. And so I hope that in addition to this very helpful discussion that we're having here, that we can talk about, the 3 of us will be able to talk about what our priorities are. I mean, I've been very clear for several months now that one of my priorities is the police station. If that's not a priority of my colleagues, we ought to shut me up. But likewise, we got to decide what the other 2 or 3 major priorities are, not the 10 or 15 things that we might do, and then establish our workload accordingly. So there's another agenda here, which was not on the agenda tonight.
That may be true, but that's one reason committees are very important to the selectmen, because they can attend to those things that you don't have the time to attend to.
So,
Yes.
okay. Bob, I'm going to address one thing. In 2018, in the town report, after we had the Harriman study, the engineering study, it was stated in the selectmen's report that we would look for a location, a site, another site for the police station. When the Building and Facilities Committee was formed, it was my hope that they would find another site for the police station. That was 4 years ago. That has not happened. So I guess that's been my biggest disappointment with your committee. And you did indicate at one of our planning board meetings that your interest in slowing this process down for the police station was money. You didn't want to spend the money to move the police station.
Janet, you are misstating things, and I am sorry for that. You suggested at a planning board, I attended a planning board meeting as a member of the CIP because I felt it was my duty to be there because I was on the CIP. During that meeting, you said to me that I and my committee was trying to delay things, and I said that's not correct. I never said I was trying to delay things, as you've just now stated. Now let's go back to 2018.
Okay.
We could go on forever.
Bob, I'm going to interrupt you. Thank you for your comment. What I would like to suggest is that we contemplate scheduling another meeting for next week. We still have a number of agenda items to go through that we are not going to get through tonight. So I'd like to defer the conversation, our family-friendly discussion, and pick a date for next week that we can meet.
I don't have my calendar.
Well, if it's on Thursday, which, do we have other things on Thursday? I think we do. Okay.
Next Thursday, you mean? Oh, every other Thursday.
One more comment.
May I say
Wait,
something?
Can you hang on just a second, Celeste?
We don't have to meet here.
Correct. Celeste?
It's fine to continue this, but I don't think that we need to hear the same rehash of the same things over and over again. And I totally agree with Janet. There was supposed to be a police station. Where is it? Why do you meet all the time? Why did you call me 15 times? Never mind.
Celeste, please.
Okay.
That's inappropriate. Thank you.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
Can we find another time to meet next week?
I'm happy to meet on Thursday night, but I think we may have to look for another site.
Either Thursday or Wednesday, I would suggest.
Wednesday is the budget committee meeting.
Okay,
The date is correct, the day is wrong, Wednesday. Wednesday, the 18th.
okay, the 19th. You find us a place to meet? Okay. All right. Then I will ask for a recommendation that we adjourn this evening's meeting and continue next week. Yes, we will sign that, but we'll not totally adjourn. We're just going to stop the discussion period and go into signing things for the vouchers. Yes, yes. Sorry, Rob. Kim will find a place.